All right. Hey, everybody. This is our third session today. I hope you guys all have electricity back and everything's back in order. I was up at school today and they just got power back. They didn't have power as of last night. So I guess there's a reason why we didn't have school today. Anyways, you should have seen the post on Google Classroom about our class updates in terms of scheduling for the upcoming week. So all classes will have the test Monday and Tuesday of next week. So Monday will be the essay, Tuesday will be the multiple choice, and then we plan to have the map assessment next Friday. So a week from this Friday, we'll do the Shepherd software in the Middle East. On Tuesday, you'll get a new pacing guide that will guide you through pretty much all of this month, October, and then the beginning of November. And that'll take us to our next unit exam. So just make sure you check out that announcement. That has a lot of details on it for all the other things that we're going to be doing, but you can share with your friends at all the classes. Miss Mann's classes, my classes, and Mr. Schuler's class will all have that same schedule in terms of the exam, so you won't have to worry about coming back tomorrow and doing that right away, or coming back and doing one day of review and then having that on Friday. It also says on there our schedule for more review sessions. So we'll have not one tomorrow morning because we have a staff meeting, but we will have one tomorrow afternoon, and then we will have one on Friday morning, and then we'll probably do one on Monday morning as well. I might do another one of these online sessions this weekend. If I have the time, I'll definitely do that because it seems like some of you are watching them and getting some help from these. Anyways, I'll try to plan another one and share with you when that's going to be. But if you guys want to keep posting to the today's meet those questions, and I can answer those when I start the next session. So I wanted to start before we get into picking up where we left off, which was around, I believe, question 16, 15, 16 on the pacing guide, or on the study guide, I'm sorry. There were some questions that were on today's meet that I want to make sure I address before I move into the next part. So where was that question I wanted to address? So the mandate of heaven we're going to be discussing, or I think we discussed that yesterday, so I'll make sure we do that today. So somebody asked, a test asked, was education first seen in China or before? You mean in China or other places? I think that maybe is what you're asking. Education is going to be important in terms of status in most societies. Having the ability to read and write is a special skill that not everybody is going to have. One of the things that is interesting to look at is how societies try to restrict access to education. Upper class people want education to be special for them only. Once you start to allow everybody to be educated and everybody to be able to read and write, you rely a lot less on those people, and that skill of being able to read and write is not as highly esteemed as some other skills are. And so, again, they want to keep it to themselves for power's sake. And so a lot of groups are going to try to maintain that just for the elite. And so education in terms of formal education, I'm not sure maybe that's what you're asking, but every society is going to have a way to educate their upcoming groups. Whether it's in a formal schooling type of environment, most places are going to have one educated scholar that's going to pick certain young people that are the children of elites to educate on those skills, so then it can be passed down. And again, because a lot of these societies we look at have very rigid social hierarchies, they don't want just anybody to be able to read and write, so they want to be able to give that and pass that down to very specific children, very specific people, so they can maintain that. But in terms of the importance of education, China is unique in terms of its widespread belief that education is important. And the idea that Confucius is going to bring to the table is that anybody who learns how to read and write and is able to become a scholar deserves the utmost respect and the utmost position in society. And so, in that way, China is interesting in that all of society, in theory, has an education or has an opportunity to get educated or has the ability to access it. But not all of them will choose to because, again, you can't forfeit your children if you're a farmer to go to school instead of working on the farm. It's just not something reasonable that you're going to do. But certainly, China is unique in a sense that, in theory, they believe that everybody has the possibility to be educated, but everybody doesn't need to. So Ashley asked, did the Shang have any trade routes at all, or were they super independent? In the time of Shang, the technology is such that you can't get past a lot of those difficult environmental obstacles. And so you're not going to be able to just access those extensive trade routes yet. These early civilizations, these early river valleys, are fairly cut off from one another in terms of each other, but they certainly are having invasions from nomadic people, and those nomadic people are then actually going to be the ones that are going to spread a lot of information about the different groups that are existing across Eurasia. And so, will they have any formal trade routes? Not necessarily in terms of like the Silk Road or something formalized like that, but they certainly will have intra regional trade, meaning trading within that particular region. And we won't see until a little bit later that South China is going to start to trade with South Asia is going to start to trade with East Asia. And we will create formal trade routes there. But as of right now, it's going to be religious figures or monasteries, things like that, that will start to create those trade routes or capitalize on those trade routes to spread their own ideas. So they won't have a very, specific trade route that they're going to be using. When did the Silk Road start to form? Silk roads are going to, where we really see them thriving and where you really need to associate the Silk Road with would be the Han, Roman, Gupta empires, because they're the ones that are developing as a result, really, of that flourishing access to trade. If we think about the success of the Gupta, it is really in South Asia in general. Their ability to urbanize is almost entirely to the credit of having access or being along that Silk Road. And so certainly that is when the Silk Road will flourish the most. We will see it earlier in terms of smaller routes, but it really only is able to do what it needs to do when we have these major empires that are participating. And again, it's going to be all the way from Rome all the way to East Asia, and then it's a series of roads that will connect also the South Asia region to that trade route. So that's what I want you to associate with the Silk Road. After Rome falls, the Silk Road is going to go into disuse. There's too many bandits, too dangerous, and now that the Romans are starting to, and the Eastern Roman Empire will still exist, and they are still going to be using it intermittently. But other trade routes are going to emerge in this next time period that are so much more reliable and profitable. And then we'll have kind of a down period, but then the Silk Road's going to come back when the Mongols come around in the 12th century. 12th and 13th century. And so we will see that revitalize, but not for right now. Okay. And so how did religion affect Rome's government? That's an interesting question, Connor. And I think that it's really, I don't know if you would be able to say that it had a tremendous effect. Because the biggest thing is that Rome, in terms of the time, and you have to be talking about what religion. If you're talking about Christianity, then yes, we have a big conversation to have there. Talking about Greco-Roman polytheism, we really don't have a lot to talk about in terms of how it affects the government. Because it's not like they're going to say, well, the gods do this, the gods do that, and therefore we are chosen to do these kind of things. It's kind of like the gods are doing their thing, they're running nature, they're doing these other things, and we function in a separate realm. And so I wouldn't say that there's a direct connection between Rome and their government and their religious practices. Again, their religion is kind of a backdrop to what they're already doing. Now, if we get into Christianity, Christianity is going to have a really big impact because then we're going to be talking about the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Eastern Roman Empire is now a theocracy. We're looking at Constantine, who's going to be the one to be the first Christian emperor. And he is going to lift that ban on Christianity. He himself will declare Christianity to be the religion that you should be. And then we have Justinian, and Justinian is going to have a code that will be religiously affiliated. He is going to build the Hagia Sophia, which is the first Christian church. And so we do have a lot of really big things happening with Christianity and Rome, but that really goes more into the very end of this time period and mostly into the next one, because that's where we get into the Byzantine Empire. And that's actually where we're going to start when we start this next unit. We have our first chapter on the Byzantine Empire. Let's see. And I think that's all the questions that I had posted on today's meet. So if you want to keep posting those questions, I will check. I will be looking at that as I answer these other questions from the study guide. And so yesterday we left off with number 15, I believe, in the Zhou dynasty, and that gets into, I saw that other question, the mandate of heaven. So we talked yesterday about the Zhou creating the mandate of heaven to justify why they're there, why the Shang fell, why it's okay that the Shang fell, because that's an even bigger deal. One of the questions that I asked you to look at and what we've talked about is who had the most significant downfall. Was it Rome? Was it Gupta? Was it Han? And in the big scheme of things, you can't possibly say that the fall of any Chinese dynasty is so devastating that they can't recover, because the biggest thing is that the Zhou puts this in place so that people don't freak out once the dynasty falls. Another dynasty is going to come in. A lot of things are going to remain the same. You're going to change maybe certain aspects of your political structure, but largely things are going to remain the same because that's just what the Chinese do. They keep things consistent. And they make adjustments where they need to, but certainly they are one of the most consistent civilizations, societies that we're going to be looking at. And so we have a lot of continuities to talk about with them. Rome will be a much more significant downfall, because unlike the mandate of heaven, which says an emperor is going to fall, a new dynasty is coming in, don't worry. But dynasties, as long as emperors are good, their children will rule then, and they will go on, and the gods will be kind of your overseer of that dynasty and will make sure that the emperor is doing what's right for the people. And if they're not, they will take care of it and make things start to come into place where they're going to be lifted out. The Romans don't have a line of succession set up, and that's why we have that 3rd century crisis where we have emperor after emperor after emperor, because they're just going in and killing an emperor, putting in a new one, killing an emperor, putting in a new one, ousting an emperor, exiling an emperor, putting in a new one. And so there isn't a really set system where we expect that the child rules and that's universally accepted by that society. It's not. Rome is a military society, and therefore they're going to value war, they're going to value violence, they're going to value violent overtake, use of military power. If we're thinking about that question on your essays about how does Rome exercise political control of the empire, they certainly use significant military power to do so. And so they are going to use legal codes backed up by military prowess and expansionism and conquering and overthrowing other groups to exercise power over them. The Han don't have to do that. The Chinese don't have to do that. And so the fall of an empire is okay. Everything's going to be fine. The dynastic cycle will make it so that things will just go into place, and we don't have to worry. And again, we talked about Taoism in terms of that being kind of an irrational practice yesterday, and how that contributes to one of the downfalls and one of the philosophies that's going to come out of the time period. Remember, the whole essence of Taoism is that you disconnect from society, that society makes you bad, that organized education, organized religion, organized all these other things, organized government, all that is at your soul's detriment, and it distracts you. It creates noise. What you need to do is go sit under a tree, and you need to just listen and meditate. But don't meditate too hard. Working hard distracts you from the Tao or distracts you from the way. And so minimal effort in any aspect of your life. Don't overexert yourself, and just kind of listen to nature. It's not reasonable. People can't really do that. That's why people will take elements of Taoism and blend it with other things, like the yin and the yang that's going to come from the Taoists is going to be infiltrated or is going to be adopted by the Confucians to say, oh yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to say. When we're trying to say a harmony and a balance in society where, you do what your parents have always done, that kind of thing, they're going to take that from the Tao. And if you think about Tai Chi and a lot of those other very traditional kind of what you would associate Chinese culture to be, a number of those things come from Taoism, because people are going to pick and choose what they want to practice in conjunction with other aspects of Chinese society. Remember, we talked about the Qin. The Qin is going to bring in that form of legalism. Remember, legalism is the use of harsh laws and punishments, and that is going to come with the philosophy that man is not good. Man is bad. They want to commit crimes. They want to do bad things to one another, and therefore you need a strong government that's going to control that. If you kind of want to relate it, and again, this is synthesis, meaning we're going to refer to another time period. But if you want to think about the Enlightenment, and you did AP Gov last year, or you did on-level Gov, and you talked about John Locke versus Hobbes. Hobbes definitely believed that man was bad and needed a strong monarchy to rule over, because not only were people out of control, but people can't be trusted to make the right decision. And so we need just a strong family to rule. Legalism is kind of that idea. It's a philosophy as well. And the Qin are going to latch onto that. A lot of people will say it's necessary that the Qin did that because, and I was telling my classes about this last week. If, in my classroom, I don't have any rule of order, that we just do whatever we want and everybody just is hanging from the ceilings and flying all over the place and there's no control, I'm obviously not going to keep my job. The next teacher that comes in, because I'm going to get overthrown, so to speak, the next teacher that comes in, if they want to get control of that room, they've got to have really harsh laws and they've got to make an example out of people. They've got to say, okay, you're going to hang from the ceiling. I'm going to give you a detention. You're still not taking me seriously. You're going to get suspended. You're still not taking me seriously. I'm kicking you out of school. And so there is going to be this series of punishments that are going to be laid down to get control of the population again. People don't like that. Nobody likes that. But people largely believe that that was necessary for the next dynasty to exist. So the Qin is just a blip on the radar, but a very important one in terms of setting the tone for what's going to come next. So obviously the Han comes next, and the Han is going to be the ones that are going to harken back to what the Zhou was doing. They like the idea of decentralization, but they still want some government power. So they're going to create provincial governments that are going to be like local governors and things like that are going to help maintain order on the bigger parts, on the outer skirts of the empire. But we're still going to have an emperor that's going to have power. And so we're going to have a little bit of a combination of those systems. One of the big things that comes out of the Han Dynasty is Confucianism. And so while Confucian existed at the end of the Zhou, those ideas are going to be, the Qin are going to get rid of all of that because they don't want anything resembling the old dynasty to exist. But those schools that were burned down, the books that are burned, all that's going to be revitalized in the Han. Han is going to bring all that stuff back because the core of Confucianism says government is good. Government is the center of everything. Government's your role model. Government should have all the power that they have because they deserve it. They need to be there. They need to be the role model for everybody else. And so they are going to reinstitute a lot of that same idea. And they're going to have the scholar gentry. That is the group of people that are going to be the educated class that are going to advise the emperor. That's the most powerful position you could be. And it's a merit-based system, which is unique because the rest of these social structures are all based on birth. The idea of a meritocracy means that you earn your place, you earn your position, and you earn that by taking the civil service exam. And so if you go to school, you get educated, you're expected to take this exam. They test you on Confucian texts and the Analects and things like that. And then you test based on what level of government you want to influence. And based on your test results, you get to have a job that associates with that level that you scored, which is a really cool situation to be in because you could, in theory, move up in society and end up being the right hand of the emperor if you score really well on that exam. And so it really is an interesting element of Confucianism where they say it's rigid, you need to do what your parents always did, except when you seek an education, and that's one of the most important things you could possibly do. And that's going to help move you in society. And so that will help the emperor make wise decisions that are the best for the people. And we'll talk more about the scholar gentry later because they won't go away and they're actually going to evolve and change in terms of what's expected of them and how much power they have. Because the scholar gentry, it becomes the most desirable place to be because that's basically being the emperor without the name. And so there's going to be a lot of things that will come out of that situation. You must know the 5 relationships of Confucianism. I think we talked about this yesterday, but emperor to subject or ruler to subject, the most important relationship. The emperor is like your father. They set the example for the rest of society. And that's why if they're not doing that, that the gods are going to remove him from that position because that's one of the most important things you can do. People want to be good. They just need to know how. And that's what Confucius will tell you. And then you have husband to wife. Obviously, the wife is in the subservient position, but it's a very important relationship. If you're the wife, this dictates how you need to treat your husband. Obviously, you treat him with respect and you do everything that he says. Parent to child, so that's usually father to son, and that's going to be mostly dictating, making sure that the son stays in his place. Older sibling to younger sibling, or older brother to younger brother, and then friend to friend. Friend to friend will be the only equal relationship that you're going to have. Um, so Bell asks, you said the Silk Road fell with Rome, but there's still parts of it being used in Asia by the Gupta and other parts of East Asia. We don't necessarily call those the Silk Road. They establish roads that are going to connect those two empires. They will be reminiscent of the Silk Road, but those roads that will be connecting those two regions will mostly be made up of monks and monasteries and then various merchants. But after the Silk Road falls, China really doesn't want to engage in trade for a while, and so they're not going to be really interested in participating in that. They're going to be much more focused on being self-sufficient. But we still will see Buddhism and those other kinds of philosophies moving between South Asia and East Asia. I just know I wouldn't necessarily call it the Silk Road, but certainly exchanges will continue to take place between South Asia and East Asia. So what were the major civilizations in classical Mesoamerica and the reasons why pastoralism did not develop in the Americas? So in terms of this chapter, or this unit, you really only had two major groups that you were exposed to, or three. You had the Olmecs, which were early on. That's going to be in Central America. That's going to be the basis of the Aztecs and the Maya. And then we're going to have the Mochi, which are in South America, and those are the basis for the Inca that will come later on. So those groups are going to set that foundational site. It's kind of like, if you want to think about Greece being a foundational society for Rome, or Mesopotamia being a foundational, Sumeria being a foundation for, Greece or for Rome. And so they are going to set the basis for all those different societies. And why didn't pastoralism develop? Because they didn't have any pack animals. If we think about horses and cattle and all these other things and sheep, all that stuff is coming from the old world. And so those animals won't actually make it over until the Columbian Exchange, and that's not going to be until another 2 units. And so the only the only pack animals that they're going to have will be the llama, and then guinea pigs, and those exactly aren't the best animals to follow around. And so pastoralism really won't exist in the Americas. They're pretty much just going to be nomadic, or they're going to be settled people. And that's that also, they say, deals with the Jared Diamond's argument of the north-south focused axis rather than the east-west axis, and the lack of diversity. Every group is going to kind of develop independently of one another rather than spreading ideas and those crops that are going to allow for interconnectedness of those groups. And so one of the questions that you talk about that is on the essay prompts is the idea of trading systems in the Americas. A lot of these trading systems are going to be intra-regional, so trading within their given area. And a lot of the analysis about that is, well, why? Well, because they don't have any crops that they can kind of cross-cultivate. They're not going to share crops because of the different climates. They're not going to be able to share, like in the Mochi, they're going to have potatoes and those kind of early crops, and corn is going to be in Central America, or maize. They're not going to be able to exchange those things because corn can't grow in the mountains, and potatoes, it's too hot in Mexico for you to grow those. And so that's really not going to work either. Let's see. Brooke asks, was the Han the only dynasty that had the opportunity to move classes with scholar gentry? No, it will be the first. But that is a continuity. So we're going to see the scholar gentry move, from the Han on, we're going to have the scholar gentry. But the scholar gentry will first emerge during the Han. So I think that that's probably what your question is looking for. So number 19, the most significant contribution of Judaism. Judaism, the most important thing you need to know about them is they are monotheistic. They are the first monotheistic religion. They stem back from what we call the Zoroastrians. The Zoroastrians had this early idea that the world is a battleground between good and evil. And anytime there's a storm, anytime there's a war, anytime there's something bad happening, it's good and evil that are fighting against one another in our realm. And so that's where they start to get these ideas of heaven and hell, as from the Zoroastrians. Zoroastrianism really doesn't go a whole lot of places, but Judaism certainly is going to be one of the most important religions in our world's history, mostly because we have this idea that an emperor is not a god. Therefore, the Jewish population, the Hebrews, are going to challenge the Roman government, and really any other government that asks you to worship their emperor as a god, or that they are one. Obviously, they're not going to get along with the Egyptians. They're not going to get along with the Romans. And they're not going to get along with any of the groups in the Middle East either. And so the the difficult thing about the Hebrews is they constantly get enslaved and then released, enslaved and then released. The biggest reason is because they're so small. The Hebrew population remains small because you have to be born into it. This is the original 12 tribes of Israel. And those 12 tribes, you're born into it, and you marry another Jewish person. You are not going to marry somebody outside, because if you do that, you're not going to be able to have Jewish children. And so because of that kind of inbreeding, I don't want to say inbreeding because they're not marrying their siblings or people that they're related to, but they're marrying other Jewish people. That's going to keep the population within itself. And so they're going to just replenish their own population rather than hugely expanding like Christianity will, or Islam, or some of these other, Buddhism, even religions that convert people. The Hebrews are not looking to convert anybody. Once Christianity comes around, now we're looking to convert people. But for Jewish people, it's really not a component of what they do. Judaism is also really important because it really is, it becomes an ethnicity. It's more than a religious practice. It is a cultural one, because there's dietary restrictions, there's practices in how you talk and live with one another. And so it's much more than just a religious belief. It is, a whole lifestyle. And so the Hebrews are considered like an ethnic group. And again, they are going to be persecuted in Rome pretty extensively. So number 20, the contributions of the Phoenicians. And that was one of the questions, I believe, that we addressed yesterday, Carthage and the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians are, again, coming out of the Mesopotamian region. They're going to be where like modern-day Israel and Palestine are. The Assyrians are going to kick them out onto the coastline and then into the Mediterranean. And again, that's really the best thing to happen to them. There are 3 things you need to know about the Phoenicians. One is their shipbuilding. They will control the Mediterranean because they build better ships than anybody else. They are much more advanced. They can traverse that pretty treacherous sea better than anybody else. So they're going to control a whole lot of points around the Mediterranean. So if you look at their empire, again, it starts in Israel and Palestine, but then it's going to really get all along the Mediterranean basin. Remember, the rim of the Mediterranean. They're going to have all ports along that coastline, especially Carthage. That will be one of the most important ones, not only by proximity, because it's a really good port to go into, but because it gets a lot of those really awesome products from Africa, and they can start to distribute some of those around the Mediterranean. The other thing you need to know about them is the alphabet. They have a 22-letter consonant-only alphabet. That means that they don't have any vowels. And this is the first alphabet that is based on sounds. That's where you get that word phonics from. And so that will be where you can start to sound out words. You put those letters together to make words, which is different, obviously, from hieroglyphics or cuneiform, which is shapes and symbols that are representing ideas. This is the first time you can start to kind of put those symbols together to make concepts or words. And then let's see, the purple dye, the murex shell. They are going to be able to harvest these and produce this purple dye that will be extremely expensive, and only the wealthy will be able to afford it, because you need to harvest so many of these murex shells to get even an ounce of this purple dye, that it becomes the color of royalty, and that's really going to bring a lot of money for the Phoenicians. They will control the Mediterranean until Rome. Rome will, in the Punic Wars, defeat the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians won't cease to exist, but they will really start to blend in, even with the Roman Empire, into a lot of these other groups. And so they will lose control of the Mediterranean to the Roman Republic. And then obviously the Roman Empire will control everything after that. Let's see, the treatment of women in the Greek city-states. So let's back up and talk about Greece. Greece and the Phoenicians are functioning at about the same time. And so we have a whole bunch of different city-states. This is kind of like Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is going to be made up of city-states because they are geographically difficult to unify, and ethnically so different because, again, it's a much less condensed space. It's much more open, so a lot of different groups can infiltrate. For the Greeks, they have a situation where they have so many cliffs and other obstacles and islands that they can't unify even on a logistical level. And so they will have a really hard time getting along with one another. They are separated in such a way that each of them will develop different political systems and different cultures. The two biggest ones that you need to know are Athens and Sparta. Why? Because they fight each other all the time. And they're the most diametrically different from one another. So Sparta is that warlike society where it's an oligarchy, meaning there's a group of people that have power. The group of people that has power are going to be these generals, these high people in military society. And then you have a fair amount of opportunity for women. Women are going to train alongside men for war. They're going to be able to participate in the Olympics. They're going to be able to do a lot of things, mainly because it requires everybody to run this society. Everybody needs to be militarily trained. Because when the men go off to fight, which they do for years at a time, women are back at home and they need to be able to protect their homes, and so they will be fully trained to be able to do that. Remember, children, only able-bodied children are going to be allowed to survive. If you are a weaker child, you're born with a defect, they're really not going to have any time to nurture you and take care of you. So it's almost like nomadic society where, if there's an elderly person, we're not going to like try to take care of them and pull them along with us. We're just going to let them die and then we're going to keep moving. And same thing for children that can't survive. We don't have time and resources to take care of you. Everybody needs to be doing a part. And so if you're not going to be able to, we really can't afford to keep you around. And so they will forfeit those children for the sake of the group. And so women are only going to take care of those that are going to be warriors. And they will start to train very early at like age 6 or 7. They're going to start to be militarily trained. And so society is very much focused on that. They're not focused on literacy. They're not focused on record keeping. That's why the majority of what we know about Sparta is what other people are writing about them, especially the Athenians. Because again, the Athenians are the smart people. They're the scholars. They're the people that are experimenting with democracy. Remember, they have a direct democracy. This is not representative democracy. That's what Rome's going to have. But Athens will have a direct democracy where all free landowning men can vote. That's not a whole lot of men. That's not a huge percentage of the population. But you do have an essence of people being able to have a direct impact on decisions that are being made. And so women are obviously not part of that equation. Women are expected to be in the back of the home when political discussions being had. They're not allowed to participate. They're going to nurture all children. If you're wealthy, your child will be educated. Girls will only be educated at a very low level, and then after that, it's not important for them to be further educated. And so they're much more about record keeping and having kind of a civilized society, and creating the agora would be very characteristic of Athens. Remember, that's that large opening meeting place where you can come together and talk about political issues. You have the Acropolis, so these buildings that are being constructed to intimidate other people, because the Athenians are very focused on not only politics but geometry and math, and making sure that they look intellectually strong, therefore they can speak to their whole group as being militarily strong, even though they really weren't. And so because they have that knowledge, the Athenians are going to be much more of a navy-based military system, where they'll have like farmers and other kinds of people that are running a navy, which is on boats, because they're smart enough to do that. They can't really handle hand-to-hand combat because they're just not focused on that. They don't have a full-time military. They have farmers that become the military. That's different for Sparta, obviously, because everybody is in the military, and they will be land-based because they're not smart enough to build ships. And so that's why they're going to be able to win the Peloponnesian Wars, is because they will invade and they will infiltrate Athens and be able to destroy them. And remember, this is also why we were very concerned about losing the ability to read and write entirely, because Sparta is really not interested in that. And so Bella asks, how did Greco-Roman polytheism spread between Athens and Sparta and be similar because they hate each other? So a lot of these, the hate comes from obviously competition. They're competing for resources, and they're both looking to expand, and they believe that their system is the best. These religious beliefs are really going to come from all these different groups that were there even before formal Greek society existed. And so if you even think about the polytheism that takes place in Mesopotamia, the Greeks are going to formalize a lot of those same ideas. The idea of each of these gods, let's name them, let's have stories for each of them. And so these religious ideas are more going to be practiced in areas where there's more literacy. But certainly, Sparta will recognize the importance of those gods because for them, the gods are even bigger than their feuding. The feuding between them is about, who's better in terms of their culture. It's not about the gods. And so the gods will be shared, even though they do have environmental obstacles that separate them. A lot of those religious ideas will still spread because they can still communicate with one another. They just can't geographically unite, so that they would be more permanent partners taking on somebody else. And so let's see, what was I going to say about that though? They won't really band together until Alexander the Great comes along, and Alexander the Great's going to be like, you guys have got to get it together because if you don't, the Persians are going to come in and take over. And the Persians are a tremendous power in the region. They are an incredibly diverse group of people. They're incredibly organized, very strong military, very strong taxation system, and they are the biggest enemy of the Greeks. Alexander the Great's father was killed by the Persians, so he has a very strong sense of revenge that he wants to enact upon them. And so he is going to lead the Greeks to defeat the Persians and keep them out of the Mediterranean. And so you should really look up the different major emperors. We have Cambyses and Cyrus and Darius. And again, the biggest component with obviously Cambyses is not in conjunction with this, but tolerance is a big component of the Persians. They don't care what religious practice you are as long as you pay your taxes. You can be any religious group you want. You got to recognize that the emperor is the emperor, and you got to give taxes. And after that, you can pretty much do what you want. And so they're also very nice to you as long as you give up. So if the Persians are coming in and you say, hey, like, just we're done, like, we're not going to fight, the Persians are very kind to you. But if you challenge them, they will defeat you, and they do have a very strong army to do that. And so to keep them out, the Persians would have been a very formidable component of the Mediterranean if they had been able to take over Greece. Let's see. We talked about Persia. So let's keep talking about Alexander the Great. So we have Hellenistic culture. You really need to know that term. Hellenistic refers to the spreading of Greek culture. And so Alexander the Great has this idea that he wants everybody to be Greek. He wants everybody to speak Greek. He wants everybody to dress Greek. And so we are going to spread those Greek ideas throughout the Mediterranean, throughout the entirety of the empire. He will encourage intermarriage between Greeks and other groups because he believes that that's an avenue to spread those ideas. He is going to actually inadvertently adopt certain elements of Persian culture into his own. He's going to marry some Persian women. He will wear some Persian clothing, even though he thinks that being Greek is the most important. We need to produce art that looks Greek. He will still do that as a token of saying, hey, I recognize that you're now part of our empire. We are now one group, so accept it, and I will accept you. And so that is a big part of who he was. And that's going to spread throughout the region. That's where we're going to also see, again, getting to Bell's question, the spreading of that Greco-Roman polytheism, the spreading of these stories of the gods, having that unified empire under Alexander is going to facilitate the spread of those ideas. We're also going to see architecture and art and drama being spread. So Greek tragedies, those kind of stories of the gods, Homer and the Odyssey and those kind of things are going to spread throughout the Mediterranean. Architecture, so square or rectangular buildings decorated with columns. We even see that today in our American architecture when we want to harken back to like our roots of democracy. We put columns on there and we say, look at, this is where we come from. And so after what events did the Romans come to control the Mediterranean? So this is question number 25, by the way, on the study guide. So this is the Punic Wars, and you don't need to know all the Punic Wars. You don't need to memorize all aspects of them. What you do need to know is that the Romans come out on top, and this is the Roman Republic. This is not the empire yet. We're on the road to the empire, but this is a fight over the Mediterranean. And so Carthage, which is made up of Phoenicians, are going to be fighting the Romans. And at the end of the day, the Romans are going to win. And the biggest obstacle will be Hannibal. Hannibal is going to fight in the Second Punic War, and they're going to just about get to Rome. But then Hannibal is called back to Carthage because Rome has attacked Carthage. And this is the Punic War where um, they pretty much say, like, we've won twice now. Can you please just give up? The Third Punic War, they just fight just because. And what's really amazing about this war at the end is what Rome does. Remember, Rome goes over to Carthage and says, we are done. Like, this is over. And just to prove that we are now in control, they take a boatload of salt and pour it all over the land so nothing can ever grow there and still doesn't grow there today. And that was an incredibly insulting, oh, that was funny, insulting situation for the Carthaginians because salt was so expensive. It takes years to cultivate salt, and to take as much of it as they did and pour it, it's pretty much just throwing gold on their soil. And so obviously it left a lasting impact, but it certainly solidified Rome's control over the Mediterranean. And so, what are some major problems in the Roman Empire? So, let's back up for just a second. So, the Roman Republic, let's talk about components of that. And again, remember, the Roman Empire starts in 31 BCE. So, anywhere before that is going to be the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic, you won't be tested on too much on the College Board exam. They don't like talking about it very much because it's kind of a blip on the radar. They don't do a whole lot of important things there. But they will be a representative democracy. And so they're going to have the plebeians and the patricians. Remember, the patricians are the wealthy, elite people. The plebeians are the low people in society. And the patricians are going to have a body of people called the Senate. And the Senate is where they elect the two principal positions. And so it's like the two presidents almost of the empire, or of the republic, I'm sorry. And so they're always from that elite group. They always come from the Senate, and so they elect those folks. The plebeians demanded that they have some part of government because the plebeians not only are the farmers, so they have control over the food, but they're also the military. And so they tell the patricians, if you don't let us have a say in government, we're just going to stop fighting and we're not going to produce food for you all. And that obviously puts them in a bad position where the patricians have to say, okay, that's fine, like, let's do this. So they create the assembly, which is then only made up of plebeians. So the plebeians have a part in government. Each of them has a vote. And the best thing about the assembly is that they get to choose who from the Senate becomes those two principal positions. So even though the two, elite positions cannot be from the assembly, they have a lot of power now because now the Senate has to appeal to those poorer folks. And that's what Caesar is really able to do better than anybody else. Caesar is going to express opportunities. Poor people need to have opportunities. They need to have fewer taxes. So he's going to ease taxation. He's going to, give opportunities for poor people to move in society. People love that. They love Caesar. This is Julius Caesar. And so when he wants to crown himself emperor, they're like, oh, we're all over that. Let's do that. Like, that's amazing. And obviously that doesn't last because Brutus kills Caesar and, it's over. But now there's like a power vacuum. Remember, this is where Mark Antony and Octavian start fighting between one another for control over Rome. Octavian is going to win because he's going to say that Mark Antony is being controlled by Cleopatra in Egypt. And obviously that's not going to go over very well. And so they're going to kill Mark Antony. Now Octavian is the ruler of Rome. Remember, this also harkens back to the importance of violence in Rome. The whole idea of Romulus and Remus making fun of Romulus, and Romulus just goes over and kills his brother and takes his land. And so the idea of patricide, killing your brother, is completely acceptable because the idea is that the older brother is going to get everything, and if you want to get something, you've got to kind of kill your way there. And so violence is definitely ingrained in Roman society. So Octavian crown is now the emperor. He becomes Caesar Augustus. That's where we get August from. Julius Caesar is where we get July from. And so we are now we are part of the empire. So Caesar Augustus is the first Roman emperor, and he will rule from 31 BC on. Obviously not forever, but he will be the beginning of the empire, and he will bring in Pax Romana. Remember, Pax Romana is Roman peace. When you are at peace within yourself, within your empire, and peace with no other competing groups on the outside, then you can really thrive in terms of trade. You can thrive in terms of the military, in terms of literature and art and all these other things when you don't have to focus on war. And so that's where a lot of Roman roads are going to be created, because the empire is going to expand all the way around the Mediterranean basin. And you need to create a whole bunch of roads to connect them to the city center so that they stay in communication. Inadvertently, those roads are going to transmit ideas. They're going to help Christianity spread. So Christians will take advantage of the fact that those Roman roads make it so easy to communicate with all people all throughout the empire that Christianity is really going to facilitate very well along those roads. But also diseases. Once diseases come in from the Silk Road, those Roman roads really allow that to spread quickly. And so things that are intentional spread and things that are unintentional are going to spread. And so there is a system where we have governors that are going to be helping facilitate on the outside. We have a system where you can join the military and serve for a year and a day, and now you're a citizen. And that provides all these different opportunities for you in the empire. And, there's a whole bunch of different bureaucratic steps that make Rome incredibly organized and make it last for a long time. Now, again, it falls in 476 for a number of reasons, but for a long time, Rome is incredibly powerful and has a whole lot of different kinds of people in it. Rome is incredibly diverse. If you look at all the different places they control, from North Africa to the Middle East through Europe, I mean, you have to think about how many different kinds of people are living under one legal system. And remember, that comes from the 12 Tables of Rome. That's from the Roman Republic. Those laws are being morphed and modified. Remember, Rome is really good at adjusting laws as things come up. And so if something happens in society, they're just going to make adjustments and then change it. Just like the whole situation where they added the assembly. Rome is very flexible. Greece was not so flexible. This is what it is. But Rome is the improved version of Greece. And so they're able to kind of modify as we go and change laws as we go. And in that way, it makes them incredibly successful. But again, that third century crisis leads to constant overturn of leadership. That's inconsistent leaders. So people are trusting their local rulers more than their central ones. When you start to have that kind of allegiance, people start to break off and they start to fight within one another. And that obviously breaks things down very quickly. And as we talked about in class, Christianity also causes part of the breakdown because people are not wanting to look at the emperor as a god, and that creates some questioning of the government. If we're thinking about invasion from the outside, we have the Visigoths, we have all these different folks, the Germanic people, that are putting pressure on the borders, and there's a breakdown in money. So remember, we talked about currency. Currency was made of those precious metals, and as things start to break down and people become poor, they don't pay as much in taxes, but people still need to get paid, like the military. So the government starts printing more coinage, but they cut it with all these other like non-precious metals, and so the coins are not worth as much, and so people stop using the coinage, and they start to barter instead. When you stop using coinage, then things that taxes pay for can't get paid for, like roads that go into disrepair. That creates a big problem. And also, if you think about it, the military is paid for by those tax dollars, and so obviously they're not going to want to fight. And by this point, people had been joining the military to get citizenship, and then they leave. And so what they have to do is start hiring mercenaries. So military officers that are paid to fight foreign officers that are paid to fight for another empire. There's no allegiance to the Roman Empire in those groups. And so they just fight for the money. And once the money stops coming, they stop fighting too. And so you can see that there's just a chain reaction of things that are causing the decline of Rome, and, trouble with taxes, a lack of faith by the Roman people and their government, brutality of barbarians on the outside, and the barbarianism of Roman emperors in general, the harshness of their laws and the overturn of their leadership. And then again, the use of mercenaries and being unable to protect the borders really creates that disrepair. Diocletian is going to split the empire in half, and that's also going to kind of expedite the process of the fall, because a lot of those powerful people will evacuate the Western Roman Empire and go to the east, to Constantinople, because they think that that's a much more optimistic place to be, and it does end up being so. Constantinople is the end of the Silk Road, and so that's a cosmopolitan center where you have lots of flourishing economic activity still, even when the crisis is happening in the West. So again, you need to know that date, 476, the fall of Rome, is really important. And so let's see. We already talked about the Han Dynasty and the philosophy there of Confucianism. Status of women in Confucian society or in Han society. Obviously, women are to be respected, but women don't have a high position in society. They have to defer to males for pretty much everything. If a woman has sons, she needs to defer to them. They have more power than she does. Let's see. Let's see, comparisons of Rome and Han dynasties. And so, if we're thinking about um, the fall of Rome versus Han falling for very similar ways in terms of uh, invasion from the outside, um, lack of faith in leadership. Again, the not as much of an issue with the Chinese because again, the Chinese do believe that another empire is just going to come and everything's going to be fine. The biggest thing is also that corruption on the outside. Tax collection becomes corrupt, local leaders become corrupt, and that creates a disconnect between the central government and those outskirts of the empire. Overexpansion, disease, all that stuff will expedite the fall of both of these empires. And if you think about socially, very different though, because China has a whole lot more holding them together that underlies all their society that's apart from the government. But in Rome, everything is the government. Everything is centered on that. And so when that government falls, they really have nothing to hold them together. Christianity doesn't come along until the very end of the empire, and it's not enough to hold Rome together after the fall. Now, again, the Byzantines are different. That's going to be the Eastern Roman Empire. But for Western Rome, there's no cultural, societal situation, system that keeps them together like Hinduism or Buddhism or Confucianism. There's none of that. And so they're going to fall, and pretty much Rome will entirely disappear until uh, we get to the end of the Middle Ages, the end of the Dark Ages. Let's see. Let's move into South Asia. Um, so in terms of South Asia, this is India. And remember, this is where the Aryans are coming. They're those Indo-Europeans, the light-skinned people. They are coming in and they're going to establish a society where they are going to rule over the Dasas. The Dasas are the group of people with darker skin again because they're the further south they are, the darker they are because they're closer to the equator. And they're going to create a system that is based on skin color, so the Varnas. And Varna literally translates to color. And so they will create the Varnas initially dependent on skin color, but after that, it's all based on karma and reincarnation. And so skin color is just used to set it up. And then after that, it perpetuates itself because you marry people within your jati and within your caste. And so your skin color will remain the same. It should remain similarly the same throughout your family's life because you will pass down that trait. But the whole idea here is that the Dasas are those conquered people, and that social hierarchy will be created initially based on skin and then be reinforced with Hinduism. And so the caste system, remember I think we talked about this yesterday. The Brahmin are at the top, the educated class, followed by the Kshatriya, the warrior class, and the Vaishyas, the, uh, the middle class, the artisans. We have the Shudra, which are unskilled laborers. They're the farmers. So those are the four Varnas that make up society. And then the untouchables are actually not part of the caste system, but they're outside the caste system. And they are doing all the dirty work, the polluting work. And they're what we call pariahs. Pariahs are outskirts or outcasts of society. And so, what are the social characteristics of Hinduism? Patriarchal, so definitely male dominated. So, similar to Han China, India will definitely have a family centered system where the nuclear family is of the utmost importance to society and to your existence. And within that, the father is the most important. There is really no social mobility because, again, you are where you deserve to be. So, again, similar to China, they're not going to encourage any mobility of any kind because you need to continue that societal harmony. You need to do what your parents always did because that creates that balance. That creates a situation where everybody can, you know, fulfill the needs of society. Han and the Gupta both don't have slaves because they don't need them. Their social system allows for them to have all aspects of life taken care of. And they don't need slaves. Rome has slaves because they conquer people. And then again, you can serve in the military to get out of that slavery. It doesn't have to be a permanent institution. But certainly they're conquering people to take care of certain tasks that they don't want to do themselves. And that's similar to Sparta. Sparta, one of the big reasons why they were such a militaristic conquering society is because they didn't want to farm. They want to be military. They want to be in the military. They want to be doing that task. But you got to have food to survive, and so you conquer other people that are going to do that farm work for you. The Romans will do that. They will have slaves, but neither of the other civilizations will because they just don't culturally need it. Um, Family's integral part. Sati is a big part of Hinduism. Again, that's going to mainly come up in the Gupta. The Mauryans don't really practice sati. Remember, the Mauryans have a little bit more opportunity for women. That's the dynasty prior to the Gupta. And remember, that also has elements of Buddhism in it. The Mauryan Ashoka is one of the big princes of the Mauryan Empire, and he's going to have that revelation that violence is bad and that we should all be Buddhists and demonstrate equality and get rid of this rigid social hierarchy. And that is for the first time going to be an incident where elites are going to practice a system of equality. That's really an aberration. If you want to look at the consistency, what we often see is the elite want things to stay the same because that allows them to have the power that they do. But this is one of the only situations with Ashoka that elites are going to start to practice Buddhism, and that's unique. But in the Gupta, they will bring it back. They will have child marriages in the Gupta, so like girls get married off at age 6 or 7. Women are obviously very subservient. If their husband dies, they are going to be thrown on their husband's funeral pyre as a suicide. To their task is done. They're defined by their husband. They actually aren't part of the caste system. They are wives of people in the caste. So you are the wife of a Brahmin. You are the wife of a Kshatriya. Again, your life is going to be better the higher up you are because obviously the wife of a Brahmin is a better treatment than the wife of a Shudra. But if you look at technically how things run, any male of any social class supersedes any female of any class. And so even the wife of a Brahmin is considered lower than a male that's a Shudra. Their lives are harder. The life of the Shudra is harder. But according to society, he has a better position in society than she does. And women want to be reincarnated as men, so they try to do their job the best that they can, so that they can qualify to come back and be a male figure in some aspect of the caste system. Let's see. How do the Mauryan and Gupta empires compare politically and economically? The Gupta is actually going to be a smaller empire than the Mauryans. The Mauryans are, by geography, going to expand larger than the Gupta. And the Gupta is not going to. Wait, what did I write here? And the Gupta is not going to exercise as much control over the outskirts. The Gupta is going to allow for a lot more of these kind of local positions to control the outskirts, kind of like the Romans and obviously the Han. They're going to have similar situations where they're going to have leadership on the outside, which also contributes to the fall in the very end. What was the Silk Road? Why did the Chinese open it? And what were some of the products that the Chinese exported? And so, again, the Silk Road is the connection between China and the Middle East. They're going to use Western horses to facilitate some of that trade. They're going to cart that stuff. Remember, you're not ever going to make the entire route along the Silk Road. You will control or you will run part of it. So you will go from here to here. You're going to sell your products at this spot. That product is going to go from this person to this person. They're going to sell it. They're going to go to the next spot, and so on and so forth till they make it all the way to the end, which does create very expensive products because they have to go through like 20 middlemen before it gets to you. Because again, that journey is so long. And so at the end of the day, it's going to create very expensive products. But again, these are already luxury items in the first place. The Silk Road is not entirely safe. Bandits and other kinds of things. There's no government that's running it. There's nobody in control that's running it. There's no taxes that are paying for it. And so in that way, it's kind of the Wild West. And so you take it at your own risk. And so in that way, the products are already going to be incredibly expensive, even if it was controlled by somebody else. But the fact that it's unsafe, there's no control, there's no oversight, makes it so that if you want to take on that risk, you're going to have to pay for the products that are going to come along that route. And so they are going to, the Chinese will export silk and pottery, spices and paper, things that they are really good at that nobody else really does. And that's, we know that they trade because we can find evidence of those products in the different parts of the trading, different parts of the Silk Roads. So in South Asia as well as the Middle East and the Roman Empire. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and we'll pick up with the Indian Ocean trade. There's not a whole lot left in the study guide, and really the Indian Ocean trade we're going to get to more in the next unit, and even the African, the Bantus, we haven't gotten to yet. And so really all we have left to talk about is the impact of Buddhism. And that's really, we've kind of already discussed that anyway. So we've pretty much covered most of the study guide by this point. So you should be in really good shape moving into the exam if you want to go over this. I would go over, if I were you, the terms that are on the first page of that study guide. I would go through those, and any of them that you don't know, I would highlight them and look them up and make sure that you understand what they mean, because these are words that appear on the AP exam, and if you don't know them, then you're at a huge disadvantage. And so Google search them, find them in your book, and define those, and you'll be in really good shape. And then you can ask me any questions you might have tomorrow or the day after at some of the study sessions. Okay, so again, if you want to keep posting questions on here, I'll print those out and I'll bring them with me to the study session. But again, there's no study session tomorrow morning. The next one we're going to have is tomorrow afternoon, and that's going to be in room 2107. That's one of the English computer labs. So, okay, I hope this was helpful, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day off, and I will see you at school tomorrow, because we do have electricity now, so we will be back. All right, take care, guys.